in the previous regime under Greg Berhalter, there was a lot of things that were good. One of the things, and I've spoken to a couple players about this, where they've said like, yeah, we kind of knew what the team was going to be, and for the most part, right, like there wasn't quite that same competition for all of the roster spots or all of the starting spots.
The national team needs to call always the best players today. Whoever's playing best today, that's who needs to be on the national team. You're never guaranteed tomorrow's game. You're never guaranteed next month's game. And I think that's the environment that we're finally back in now.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to the very first episode of Inside American Soccer, a podcast where we dive into all things U.S. men's national team every week in the pivotal run to the 2026 World Cup and beyond. I'm your host, Tom Bogert, and I'm joined by my friend and one of the greatest players in U.S. soccer history, a veteran of 3 World Cups and a very successful United States U20 World Cup head coach, Tab Ramos. Now, Tab, we are extremely excited to start the show. Maybe I shouldn't say we. I'll see if you have a surprise for me here. But we want to go inside what's really happening with the U.S. team. The players, the coaches, the pressure, from roster debates to tactical tweets. What's working, what's not, what it means as we approach the World Cup. Tab, how excited are you about this team, about getting stuck in?
Yeah, well, Tom, first of all, it's great to be doing this show with you. I know all the work that you do every day. I don't know if you sleep at night at all with all the work you do, but I'm very excited about doing this show, and in particular, I'm starting to get very excited about our national team. I think we couldn't be starting this show at a better time. I think we're turning things around finally, and it's really going to be great over the next few months analyzing everything these guys are doing.
I agree. Right when things got really, really good, now we have a 4-month break between matches. But don't worry, all the players, or most of the players, the non-MLS guys at least, are going to be playing a ton this winter. There is endless storylines, endless things to get into, and I really can't wait. Before we really get stuck in, Tab, again, we all know you from your incredible playing days, the way that you set the tone for this program, the history of this program. But beyond that, I hope that people will look fondly at your time as the United States U20 head coach, and particularly with this cycle, a lot of this current pool played under you.
Yeah, no, and that's really what it's about. I think it's nice that I had quite a long career with the national team, but I think what's most important is my connection a little bit with this particular group and who they are. Not just as a coach of the under-20 national team, but having been the youth technical director of U.S. Soccer at the time, so sort of overseeing all of the youth national teams with which these guys sort of came through. They're great players. They've been successful in the youth game. And I think we've been waiting for that to be translated into the senior game. And finally, I think we're starting to see the results of that.
Yeah, we talk often about potential, about ceilings, about what could be. And again, the team in 2022 at the World Cup, I thought were solid, strong. They didn't overperform, but they certainly met expectations. And that was the youngest team at the 2022 World Cup. So it's been a bit of a rocky road between World Cups here. But again, after this November window with wins over Paraguay and Uruguay, things are looking up and feeling pretty good. And like you said, the trajectory is going. But before we get into the games, just to establish our relationship, our connection. So we're both from New Jersey, both proudly from New Jersey. And thinking back to growing up, like you, Tony Miola, John Harkes, like those guys were legends, right? Like mythical figures kind of in my family. I was born in 95, so I wasn't there live for the 94 World Cup, but I'm well read and well watched on all of that stuff. I was an okay player. I played for your academy, NJSA, back in the day. At one time, you coached me and a group of players on a trip to Argentina. And I'm proud to say that is where I knew I was not going to be a professional player when we were playing River Plate. And I couldn't get near any of those kids. And I thought I was pretty good when I was 14. And I was like, oh, that's what a professional soccer player looks like. So Tab, thank you for being there while I realized I wasn't quite good enough.
Well, this is a great thing. I'm first of all, I obviously started my own club back in 2004 when I retired from playing, and I grew the club from 4 teams to 36. So we were doing something right at the time. But I tell you, I think, it's for me as a coach, it's great to see some of let's say, my former players doing well, not just in soccer, but in life in general. Just yesterday, Duke LaCroix, one of my players who plays for Haiti, qualified to the World Cup, and that's really exciting. So, I remember the trip to Argentina. I liked always getting all of our players in front of some of the best players from around the world, and I think what better experience than to go to the place where the players have, a real hunger for being successful. And obviously, those were tough matchups for us, but I think a great learning experience.
A little bit tougher on me than a couple of the other guys who would go on to go pros. But enough about that. Let's get into the real topics and what we're all here for. On today's show, we just have so much to get to. Hopefully, there will just be a minimum of yelling over each other, as New Jersey guys tend to do, but no promises on that front. We've got reaction to the Paraguay and Uruguay wins, plus which players helped or hurt their chances of making the World Cup roster in this window. With that, Tab and I will give our best starting 11 for this group where we sit right now. I'm sure there'll be plenty of changes between now and June. Then we'll go inside the locker room where Tab gives us a story of how he brought Tanner Tessmann into the national team. And beyond that, we'll go inside the notebook where I give you 3 storylines or my latest scoops, everything inside U.S. men's national team soccer that you need to be watching this week and moving forward. That's what's to come today and every week. Please rate, review, subscribe to Inside American Soccer with Tom Bogert and Tab Ramos, wherever you get your podcast. It is so important, so helpful. Please show the love, and we appreciate you. We're excited to get stuck in here, so let's take a quick break before we break down the wins against Paraguay and Uruguay. What a November window it was for the USMNT. Despite being without Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams, Chris Richards, Weston McKennie, Tim Weah, Anthony Robinson, Malik Tillman, and more, the United States beat Paraguay 2-1 and thrashed Uruguay 5-1. These are 2 teams that are going to the World Cup, and particularly in Uruguay, I know that they've been a little bit down lately, Tab. This is a team that I don't think anybody'd be surprised if they make a little run, particularly getting to the knockout stage is a bare minimum. All that is to say, these are 2 good teams and 2 teams that friendly doesn't really ever happen, whether it's an exhibition or a World Cup match, which I thought was really, really good. So it's now a 5-game unbeaten run from what I believe to have been the rock bottom of the Mauricio Pochettino era, that loss to South Korea in September, in which they were dominated out of the game for the first 60 minutes. 5 games unbeaten with 4 wins, all 5 of which against World Cup-bound opponents. So, Tab, what is your biggest takeaway here from the November window?
Well, I think there's no question that the biggest takeaway is that we just beat and outplayed 2 teams that are legit World Cup teams who potentially qualify every time. Obviously, Paraguay has great individual players who can, turn a game upside down anytime. We didn't allow them any chances to do that. As a matter of fact, they created very few, maybe a couple chances the whole game. And then meeting Uruguay, a team that's always difficult because even, they're at a down moment. They're not playing well. They've been sort of going in the wrong direction for about the last year. But they're always a tough team to beat. I think they gave up more than 1 goal in a game only a couple times over the last couple of years. I mean, you just don't score on them. And for us to score 5, and by the way, could have scored more, I think says a lot for where this team is, where the intensity of this team is. And one of the things that really stood out for me is that this team is starting to look once again like an American team from an effort standpoint. That's something that we've been missing for years. And now when you add the fact that our players are getting better, and now we're matching the effort of previous American teams, I think those are ingredients for success. And I think what we saw in the Uruguay game is certainly that signature win that we've been waiting for years now.
Yeah, the fight, the intensity, the energy, that has been lacking. That's something that Mauricio Pochettino has stressed, both from what I've heard internally in the locker room, from what we've seen that comes out of the locker room, and pretty much every press conference that I've been on. That is something that he's worked really, really hard to instill in this group. He's also worked to instill competitiveness and this idea that I don't care what your name is. I don't care how many caps you have. I don't care about any of this. Like, you got to earn your spot on the roster, on the field, every single game, every single window. And again, there are several players that are missing due to either current injuries or managing workload. But he hasn't been afraid to drop guys. I mean, you go back to the summer, Christian Pulisic said that he needed a little bit of a break. He wanted to play in the 2 friendlies against Switzerland and Turkey, but sit out the Gold Cup. And Pochettino said, no, like, all right, like, you're either all in or you're not here. I'm not calling you. Go back to the summer, he wasn't going to call Gio Reyna or Weston McKennie, even if they weren't with the Club World Cup. And he's done this kind of time and time again. Tap, they've called up 71 players in this calendar year. I would say that's too much, but you can't really knock like the foundation of his message of trying to show everybody you have a chance. And in the previous regime under Greg Berhalter, there was a lot of things that were good. One of the things, and I've spoken to a couple players about this, where they've said like, yeah, we kind of knew what the team was going to be, and for the most part, right, like there wasn't quite that same competition for all of the roster spots or all of the starting spots.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dissect there, because you can start with the last part in which you say, okay, the team didn't change at all over the last however many years under the previous coach. And I think the reason for that was that these guys were called the golden generation back in 2019, when we sort of got all the younger players together, and sort of the process and the message coming out of U.S. soccer was that this was really going to be the 2026 team. And so these guys were not playing. I think they were never playing that game that they were in. They were always looking into the future. They were always thinking that, hey, we're the young guys. We're going to play this World Cup, and then we're going to play the next one. And I remember saying at the time, hey, this is the national team, by the way. The national team needs to call always the best players today. Whoever's playing best today, that's who needs to be on the national team. You're never guaranteed tomorrow's game. You're never guaranteed next month's game. And I think that's the environment that we're finally back in now. I think it took Mauricio Pochettino a lot longer than we wanted it to take. But I think Mauricio Pochettino now is at a point where he says, what starters? Who are we missing? Right? And this is a good place to be, because if anything, what we just saw against Paraguay and Uruguay shows the guys who are not here, who are potentially the starters, that, hey, when I get back, I better get on my horse and be the best I can be, because this is not my spot guaranteed. And I think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, after the game on Tuesday night, Mauricio Pochettino, his press conference, he comes in jubilant or smiling. He's a pretty affable guy, win, lose, or draw. I particularly pregame, but after the game, they win 5-0. You could tell he's feeling fine or whatever. The mood in the locker room was obviously very positive. The first two questions were fair questions, but he took exception to maybe the way they were framed or the way they were asked. The idea behind the question from a couple of the reporters in the room was like, the depth, you've wanted to improve the depth, you wanted to improve the strength of the pool, and be able to rely on more players than previous. Like, pretty much the question was without your regular starters, air quote. And Pochettino was like, what is this? What do you mean regular starters? Like, his direct quote was, I hate the no regular players question. What does this mean? It's USA playing. It's the national team. Stop with that mindset. Every time our decision to pick a starting XI, that's the U.S. men's national team playing. He kind of got annoyed by the next question, and said, he goes, I don't know what happened. Like, we won 5-1. It feels like we lost 5-1. Do I need to go back in the locker room and then come back out and restart the press conference? And then they kind of asked about Berhalter's really good set piece goal, where it was at a tight angle. He rolls it short. It's touched back to him, and he fires it in the top corner. And with him being a little touchy after the first couple questions, it was like, hey, did you work on that in the training ground, or did the players kind of have the freedom to come up with that on their own? And he throws his hands up and goes, no, it happened by coincidence. Yep. Like, you could tell he was like really annoyed by everything. And again, like, I just think that level of fight, that level of, again, continuing to establish, no, there are no regular players. Nobody is guaranteed a starting spot. I don't care about the players who weren't here. I only care about the players who were here.
And by the way, I think what's really important about yesterday, and you're absolutely right. I mean, he was basically insulted by the fact that he was asked if, hey, do you guys work on this stuff, or does it happen by chance? Because that's really the question. And obviously he's a coach that's been around, so I can understand that. I can understand him being insulted by that. At the same time, I have to say this about the guys who are not here and the guys who were here and played the game. There are games that you played. Say we played against Bermuda. No disrespect to Bermuda, but you can make plays. You can score a hat trick in that game, and people are always going to say, "Hey, okay, it was Bermuda, right?" But if there was one thing that we said before the game against Uruguay, that was that, hey, when you make plays in this game, they really matter. these plays matter. So if you make a play today, it matters, because if you can make it today, you likely can make it against anyone. And I think there was a lot of guys that made big plays last night. So it doesn't matter at this point for Pochettino, who's not here. What matters is that the 11 guys that played last night against Uruguay made the plays necessary to win big games. And that really matters.
I agree, and I like what he did in terms of like a motivation standpoint and preaching his message. But let's not also be naive. I think Pulisic, Adams, and Richards feel pretty safe that they're going to be starters if they're fit. But maybe I'm just assuming too much. Really quickly, my biggest takeaway from this window is that there's an identity and a foundation on which to build upon moving forward, and currently has already put in the building blocks. This time, September, again, after the first game, particularly after the first 60 minutes, that was after the losses of Switzerland and Turkey. They didn't perform super well at the Gold Cup. They got ran off the pitch by Mexico in the final. It took a penalty shootout, I believe, against Guatemala or Costa Rica. They weren't impressive in any way in that Gold Cup. And then to follow it up with just getting thrashed by South Korea, and they didn't look like they deserved to be on the same pitch, quite frankly. And they didn't. More worrying was they lacked ideas. I kept asking people, what is this team's identity? And everybody would kind of shrug their shoulders. Right now, we know what the identity is. It's at least basic out of like a 3-4-2-1 in possession. That's how they like to build. It's a 4-4-2 out of possession. But it gives more freedom to those attacking three. Balogun in particular has looked really good over the last few months in finding the channels and finding the space. Pulisic, when he's played, looks more connected to the other attackers, where he sometimes could be a little isolated in the 4-2-3-1, or, he's not quite a 10, but you want him more centrally. So I think at the very least, this structure and the style of pressing and wanting to press and wanting to be on the front foot, they said that in the summer. They said that before the game against South Korea. There was no evidence of that on the field. But I think, again, after these last 5 games, 5.5 really, when they switched to the 3-4-2-1 in the second half against South Korea, they've been good, but more impressive to me is that it's been a cohesive plan, and you watch this team and you can say, "Oh, I know what they're trying to do."
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we've been waiting for that, right? Because I think, for the last year, we've tinkered not only with the players we've called in, and you called it was 70 players that we called, but it seemed like every time we played a different system. We were doing something different. At times, when Jedi played, he was all the way inside, if you remember. At times, both outside backs were going forward at the same time. So we were doing all kinds of different things. And now it seems like we have that identity back. Now, I'm going to put on the brakes a little bit here, because we also have to see that we have to look back just a couple months ago, when we played European teams, right? And Switzerland did destroy us. And so now we have 4 months that are going to be really difficult for us, because we're coming back from such a positive. And I think that we're all thinking, well, we were hoping that we'd get to a World Cup quarterfinal. I think we can do it. And by the way, I think we can. But I think we have to make sure that when we come back in the next window, we come back with the same intensity that we left this one.
I completely agree. As a coach, you could speak to this much better than me, but it's never quite as bad as you fear. The game against South Korea, and maybe it's never quite as perfect as things feel even after a 5-1 win against Uruguay. On the individual front, I thought this was a really fascinating camp, particularly against Uruguay. This was already a team, and I already mentioned all of the guys that are missing from the squad itself. From Paraguay to Uruguay, 9 different players entered the starting 11. So we really didn't know what to expect in that second game, because I thought the first performance was really strong. Only Matt Freese and Serginho Dest started both games. And over this window, over these 180 minutes, we saw pretty much everybody. There's a lot of good performances. That'll happen when you win 2 games against 2 good teams. The first guy that we got to talk about, and I can't believe I haven't mentioned his name yet, Gio Reyna. He comes back for the first time in what, a year and a half? 4 minutes into his first game against Paraguay, he scores a header. He goes off in celebration. You could feel like the emotion. You could see the teammates rallying around him, which I thought was really cool, because there has been issues there in the past, and unfortunately it is part of his story. But he played really well against Paraguay. Sometimes, he's never going to press like Brendan Aronson but he's also going to do things that only really Christian Pulisic can do in this pool. He's a special player, and we all hope that he stays healthy and everything goes according to plan. So I thought this was a really impressive window for Gio Reyna, who then comes off the bench against Uruguay and adds an assist.
It's likely that that's the one player that made the most progress. Obviously, we'd have to talk about Freeman as well, but I think when we talk about Gio Reyna, because we didn't expect anything. I mean, he hasn't played games, and so having said that, I would agree with you that he and Pulisic are the ones that can actually make plays in those very difficult pockets in between the defensive midfielders and the back line. And so Gio Reyna, I think for me, has likely locked a spot for the World Cup, just because I don't feel that Gio Reyna is or will be a 90-minute player by the World Cup, at least as long as he doesn't play for his club. I mean, you have to think he's 23 years old. He hasn't really played 90-minute games in years, 3-4 years, right? And you would want a 23-year-old to be playing 30, 40, 50 games in a year that are 90-minute games in order to be prepared. Having said that, I think if I'm a coach and if I'm coaching this team, I would love to look down the bench and see a solution there. And Gio Reyna is certainly a solution. If there's 15, 20 minutes left in a game, he can come in and change the game. And that's something that I think it's important for a 26-man roster.
Yeah, I totally agree. It would be really, really difficult to leave him off if he's healthy. And again, that has been a very, very big if. He hasn't played more than 610 minutes in a club season since 2020, 2021. So he's really struggled with injuries. A bad decision to go on loan to Nottingham Forest. Didn't quite get back into Dortmund. But again, we all know how talented he is and how good he can be. And like you said, Tab, finding a solution on the bench, not a bad spot to be in. Again, I don't want to hark on the negatives, but he almost got voted out. The squad almost voted him out of the World Cup in 2022. That discontent came from, hey, you're not going to be a starter. So that he's matured since then, and I hope that he kind of will, whether or not he is or isn't a starter, as long as Pochettino has that kind of man management under his arm, and everything that we've seen with Mauricio Pochettino would suggest that he can. And once again, Gio Reyna has matured since that World Cup, but it is something to monitor. But first and foremost, it is his health, and we do hope that he plays a ton of minutes, as many minutes as he can. Another player who I think really helped the case for the World Cup, Seb Berhalter. If for nothing else, his set-piece delivery is elite, and that matters a lot in knockout tournaments, but also he's just a good player. He can fit a couple different roles. He's somebody that you could bring on if you're losing and you're chasing because of that set-piece delivery, his engine, his motor. And if you're winning and you need to see out a result, he's a dog. So I really thought Seb Berhalter proved well in a really, really competitive midfield group in this pool.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing about Berhalter is he's got the fight, right, to start with. And that's the easy part for him, and that's nice to see. And on top of it, he's a good player. He's a coach's son, so he understands the game. He reads the game well. I think the tough part about Berhalter is that central midfield is so crowded. When you look at you have Adams, you have Tillman, you have McKinney, you have potentially even Cardozo coming back. There's so many names. I don't want to count Musa out yet because I think he's been played on the outside when really he's more of a central player. And the reason I don't count him out is because we were counting Gio out for not playing, and he came back, and here he is, and now we think he's on the team now. So I don't count him out either. So, but the point is, you still have Roldan, you still have Morris. There's so many players. It's a very crowded midfield, and can you justify starting a midfielder just because he has good certain no, and I don't want to say just because.
Fair.
There's no question he's a great player. But I think, is that what tips the scale? Is it that he can serve a good ball? And I'm not sure that's going to be enough. But having said that, he had a great window. He couldn't have done better.
Yeah, I would add, too, that with how competitive that midfield group is, if Berhalter doesn't play well this camp, I think it's pretty easy to kind of write him off and be like, okay, we're going to give more looks to Morris and Tessmann and Roldan. And again, maybe Musa works his way back. McKennie, maybe he'll be back in the next camp in March, and we'll see how that all develops. It would have been easy to say, okay, well, we gave him a chance, and he didn't really do a ton against two really good teams. And again, I thought he was really solid. Last one on the big winner side is Alex Freeman. I think that I overlooked him for this, not because he wasn't awesome, but because I kind of feel like he's already got a seat on the plane. I know that we just spoke the entire show about nobody's spot is guaranteed, all this stuff. But Alex Freeman has been a shooting star over the last year for this team, for Orlando City, and scores twice against Uruguay, one of which he put Ronald Araujo, FC Barcelona center back, put him on skates and put the ball in the corner. You wouldn't know that was a right back.
No, I thought it was Doku coming inside and dribbling. He looked just like him. And by the way, I know that it was after a free kick, but I think it was following a corner or some sort of set piece, because otherwise, how do you end up with your center back basically on the left wing dribbling inside onto his right foot? So, but I think that shows the freedom, right, that Pochettino has given the players, because normally after a set piece, if you're a center back, you're like, okay, I better run straight back, right? Or at least stay in the middle, stay in the box. So that was good to see. But look, there's no question. I think before this camp started, Freeman was on the plane to go to the World Cup. He didn't really need, I feel he didn't really need these two games to get to go to the World Cup. He needed to just do what he was doing before, and he just took it to the next level. I mean, the kid is 21 years old. He's got interest from the teams in Europe. I think, if anything, Alex Freeman put himself in a spot where Pochettino now has to think that, is this my starting 11 guy? Because you really have to think about that.
I would agree. And we'll hear more about Alex Freeman's future in the Inside the Notebook in our next segment. On to the guys who maybe didn't quite help themselves enough, maybe hurt a little bit in terms of this, again, wide open and competitive roster, fighting for those spots on the plane to the World Cup, or maybe a bus. No, everybody would have to take a plane. We have a big country. So the first one that I think, Joe Scally, I don't think he was necessarily bad against Paraguay. But the goal ends up going over his head. He's a really good fit for that right center back role in the back three, or the fluid 3-4. I just was hoping to see a little bit more from him, though I do hope that he'll get another call in the build up to the World Cup. But while we're talking about Freeman taking his chance pretty much every camp he's been in, I can't say the same about Scally this month.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And by the way, I don't think anyone did poorly in this camp. You know, I mean,
right.
All the players.
It was hard. It was hard coming up with three here. It was hard.
Both games, players played well, but we can certainly say that some didn't help themselves, and maybe Scally, like you say, didn't take it to the next level. Didn't become one that's going to be fighting for a starting 11 spot, maybe. But I think in the game against Paraguay, he did well. I mean, there were quite a few times in which he overlapped Serginho Dest on the right side and got all the way down the line. So, which shows, again, the freedom that Pochettino has given his players, and at the same time, the initiative that Scally takes when he has the ball, that he's not afraid to go forward. And I think, you know, as a coach, that's something that you value tremendously, in particular in important games when the plays you make matter. So, I don't think Scally hurt himself. I think, you know, it was nice to see him back. I think we had all heard about potentially some issues off the field, let's say, that sometimes as outsiders, let's say, we don't necessarily know all of them, and nor should we. But the fact is, he's back in the picture now, and I think he'll be fighting all the way to the end.
I agree. Another, I think, group of players that didn't help themselves because they didn't really have the chance to, is every goalkeeper that is not named Matt Freese. Matt Freese has now started each of the last 12 USMNT games. We talk about how much rotation there is, how many opportunities are given to a lot of players, how much Pochettino wants to see different combinations of players. Well, one spot he clearly doesn't want to see combinations of players is in between the net, is in the net. Matt Freese, again, starting 12 of those. He's started, 13 of the last 14. The only game he hasn't started since the Nations League was the 4-0 loss to Switzerland. So the very worst game was the only one that he happened to not be playing in. He's been, I think, solid. And Matt Turner wasn't even called in this window. again, the other goalkeepers on the roster that included Jonathan Klinsmann, Roman Celentano, Patrick Schulte. I just think that over those three guys, Matt Freese is just head and shoulders the starter.
Yeah, I think he's been showing that, and I think Pochettino is one that listens to his goalkeeper coach as well. Tony Jimenez, the goalkeeper coach, was my former teammate in Spain, and a great goalkeeper, by the way, with a lot of attitude in goal. I think at this time, it's clear that Pochettino is not going to be making any changes there. I think Matt Freese has done well enough to keep the position, and the fact that no one is really pushing him hard makes it a lot easier, right? Because if we look at the goal against Uruguay, he looked a little bit shaky when he came out, and kind of left, the defender stranded there with the goal open. So I'm not sure. Again, I'm not an expert on goalkeeping, so sometimes that's a good thing. If I were the coach of the team, I'd have to ask the goalkeeper coach, is what he did bad there, or is it good? It looked bad to me. It looked bad to me as not an expert goalkeeper. But sometimes a goalkeeper coach will give you the answer that, well, he had to come out and delay so that the player had to take an extra touch so that we could get everybody back. So, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. But there's no question that if there's one clear position on this team right now, that's Freeze's position in goal.
Last one in that really, really competitive midfield group, maybe Aiden Morris, maybe Brendan Aronson. Again, I don't think that they played poorly, but didn't quite separate themselves the way that Gio Reyna, Sepp Berhalter, and the others did this window. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of Aiden Morris. He's a great player, both two-way player. Playing in Middlesbrough, the way he plays. Week in and week out. I mean, he's just a great player. It would really be a shame that he doesn't make the team, but unfortunately, I think not his own doing, because I think he played a good game yesterday. I just think Berhalter did better and potentially surpassed him, right? And so there's only so many spots you have, and I'm sure Pochettino's making a list, and when you make that list, maybe you take 5 and maybe you're fighting for that 5th spot and somebody else took it, right? And so I think that's one that unfortunately this camp didn't work out for Aiden Morris. And I think Aronson, that's a really interesting one, because I think he also didn't play a bad game against Paraguay. I think, but again, same thing I would say about Gio Reyna, where I think Aronson is not going to be a starter at the World Cup, right? As I think Gio is likely not going to be. But again, if I'm the coach and I'm looking down the bench, we all know what we get out of Aronson. And he's a maximum effort guy. I would always want him on my team. He's a player that I think every coach wants, and in particular, if you're going to high press, right? He high presses, like he gives you everything. So you always want him. But in the end, if you're looking for a player to win a game with 15 minutes left, I think we have other options that are better at this point. And unfortunately, when you look at down the bench and you're seeing maybe Gio, or you're seeing Luna, or you're seeing guys that potentially can turn a game upside down, you probably want that. And so because of that, I would say that this was not a great camp for Aronson.
So speaking of that starting 11, we're going to do this most weeks, if not a whole lot, between now and the opening game of the 2026 World Cup. If the World Cup started today, assuming most of these players are fit and healthy, what would our starting 11s be? I'll go first so that I don't embarrass myself and I don't have to pretend like telling Tab that he's wrong. It should be you telling me where I'm an idiot here. So I'll go first. Freese in goal, and I have this as the 3-4-2-1. I think that should be the formation that they play, again, every game from now until when they get eliminated from the World Cup. Miles Robinson, Chris Richards, Tim Ream as the back three. Tim Weah, right wing back, winger. Tyler Adams. Tanner Tessmann, I went back and forth on who should be the partner Adams. And then Anthony Robinson is just still a slight over Max Arfston, though I think Max Arfston is a better fit for that left wing back role because of the way he can eliminate guys off the dribble, whereas Anthony Robinson is really, really good. His strength is more of the overlapping runs, and maybe that becomes predictable. But for now, Anthony Robinson is there. And then the two underneath the forward is Christian Pulisic, and I went with Malik Tillman because I think that the two of them have a good connection, and again, they can do they can both do things like a number 10, but also a little bit like a winger, a little bit like a second forward. I think they complement each other well, and then Flo Balogun up top.
Wow, I mean, I can't argue much with that one, but I'm gonna go a little bit different, and I think we have a couple.
Same formation
Yeah,
or
no, we
different?
have to go same formation. I think because it looks like this is what fits us best. I don't think, if you're looking at our team and you've seen what's happened over the last couple of years, I don't think we can be confident to play with two center backs only. I just don't. I
Yeah, I would
just
agree.
don't trust two together. I think with three we do much better. And I would go with certainly with Freeze in goal because at this point it's his position to lose. I would go after this camp. I would go with Freeman. I'm projecting Freeman to be even better 6 months from now, and I think I'll take
Hmm.
Freeman as one of the three center backs with Richards in the middle and McKenzie on the left side. Um, on the wide, let's say outside backs or overlapping backs, I'll take Dest on one side and Jedi Robinson on the other side. I'm hoping that Jedi starts to get back on the field more, at Fulham, and that he's consistent by then. We can't forget that Jedi, I think to me, has been our best player over the last 5 or 6 years,
Hmm.
consistently. Last 5 or 6 years, I would think he's been our best player, and I think he gave us a lot. And I'm hoping that he can get back to that level. If he does, that's going to be something else on that side, especially knowing that he's got cover in the back. The center of the field, here's where it'll depend on what Pochettino wants to do. If Pochettino is thinking that, McKinney is maybe he plays McKinney as almost like that second 10 as he's done, like maybe top of a triangle kind of thing. I'm not sure. But I'm going to have to go with definitely Adams being one. And then the tough decision on whether McKinney plays that defensive role, which I think he certainly can do, or you want somebody like, I think, Tessmann there, because Tessmann has better feet. Tessmann has better feet,
Yeah.
so Tessmann I think could do a good job. So one of those two there, and then the two behind the forward, I'd have to go also with Tillman and Pulisic. But I would think that depending on the opponent, because I'd like to see Weah there instead of Tillman, because I think Weah has a little bit more goal in him and has a little bit more of the running behind the defense. And
That's fair.
and so one of those two would be there. Pulisic would be the other one. Without question, Balogun is the nine.
Yeah, he scored, I believe, four straight starts. It was at least three, so it was another good window for him. And I just think that he's currently the best forward, though. Haji Wright wasn't great against Uruguay, or didn't make an impact, I should say. He's somebody, he's doing so well with Coventry City. It feels like we've gotten answers, or at least possible answers, to a lot of the questions that were lingering in the summer. And things look pretty bleak then, not going to lie. So that's a positive development. We're going to take another quick break here. But next up, Tab's going to tell us a story of his connection with Tanner Tessmann and how he brought him into the national team fold. Plus, we're going to go inside the notebook. Well, it's time to go inside the locker room, where Tab tells a story from his playing or coaching days. And today, he's got a good story on how he brought Tanner Tessmann into the national team pool. Tab, take it away.
Wow. Okay, that puts a lot of pressure that I have to be able to tell a good story. When you're a national team coach, you're constantly in contact with all the clubs. Speaking with coaches, speaking in particular when it's youth national teams, you're speaking with their academy coaches or the reserve team coaches. In this case, MLS Next Pro coaches. And sometimes you're speaking with the first team coaches because the players are now getting opportunities with the first team. So I remember speaking to Dallas, and I think it might have been Oscar Pereja at the time that was at Dallas. Talking to me about this big kid that they had, and that they were given opportunities with their second team, and he was doing great with the second team and starting to give opportunities with the first team because he felt like he had a lot of tools that were important. And so we called Tanner to the under 20 national team, and I remember we watched him over the first couple days. Brian Bliss and I and Omid Namazi, we were all discussing obviously all the players, but in particular Tanner kept standing out, and he ended up. As it happened, he ended up having a great camp. We played him at that 8 role where he could get behind the forwards a little bit. We changed him to the number 10 role because we felt like, man, we've seen this guy in practice. In any small-sided game we have, man, he can really hit a ball, right? And so then now you're starting to add up, and you're like, okay, well, he's got good feet. He defends hard. He's got a good shot from outside the box. He actually holds the ball really well with a man on his back. He's a big kid, but he's got good skill. And so the camp ends, and at the end of the camp, I remember sitting at the airport, and I go over and sit next to Tanner, and I go to Tanner, I have an issue that I haven't had here really with anyone. I said, I don't really know where to play you. I said, because I think you can play every position. I think you can do anything. And this brings a good point that most players are sort of focused in one position. And the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about Tanner is because I still feel like Tanner Tessmann can play pretty much any position straight up the middle. Obviously, now when you're talking about senior national team, I think he couldn't take Balogun's spot, because he's not. But if you wanted to play with a target 9, he likely could do it. He could do it. And if you want to play him as a 10, he has the skill to be a 10, and he can finish. If you want to play him as a defensive mid or an 8, he can do both. And if potentially you wanted to use him as a center back, he could do that as well. He's good in the air. He's got good feet to play out of the back. So I think that was the neat story about, when you get so many kids, hundreds of players over the years, that you remember stories about certain ones. Tanner was certainly one that stood out because he's one of the few players we had that could do everything.
And listen, if you need a 35-yard field goal to win an ACC game, Tanner can do
Right.
that too. He famously had signed a scholarship to play soccer and kick for Dabo Swinney for the Clemson football team. Some people thought that might have been a little bit of pressure on that professional contract to come from Dallas. But
Isn't that his
time,
uncle or something?
Godfather.
Okay, yeah. I knew it was something.
Some familiar connection. But obviously, he was good enough to kick and at least be in the mix at Clemson. Was that? What were you ever in some of those conversations? Were you like, what do you put the football away? Put our football back, not the gridiron football. Was any of that ever come up when he was in camp?
No. You certainly don't want to discourage players from doing whatever it is that they want to do. What's important is their performance when they come into camp. That's what matters. You judge what they do on the field and how they interact with other players off the field. I think when you have those two down, that's really the only things you worry about.
Really quickly, our good friend, Uncle Tony Meola, famously was with the New York Jets a little bit as a kicker. Who's the better kicker, Tony or Tanner?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's hard to go against my buddy Tony Meola. It's he's the best. A little story about Tony. We used to train at Giant Stadium when MLS started, the first year of MLS. I mean, Tony can destroy a ball. By the way, when he kicks it, he used to after practice pump balls into the upper deck. So that was a sight to see. He used to pump balls into the upper deck. Yeah.
God, he's the man. Oh man. No, that was really good. I like the insight on Tanner Tessmann because we see him. Obviously, I think defensive mid, or at least holding midfield, where he can play as like a deep lying playmaker, is his probably best role. He's doing it really, really well for Lyon. But it goes to show how all around, how all action he can be. I remember when he was breaking through with Dallas, I was speaking to somebody there, and I was just like, hey, who in the second team is the next guy? This was at the time where Ricardo Pepi was coming through, or Brian Reynolds, Paxton Pomacco. You insert. Dallas was just a factory at that point, after Chris Richards, after Weston McKennie. And someone was like, this kid Tessmann, it's good, really good. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. I'll keep an eye on him. Do you think that he's going to translate to the first team? The guy just kind of laughed and was like, I think he can. I think he might. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll watch that. It was like 14 hours later. It's like FC Dallas signs Tanner Tessmann to a 4-year contract. His first pro deal. It's like, they're well into this kid.
Yeah, he certainly is a special player. And I think the fact that, he's playing at Lyon all the time and at times, running their midfield, I think says a lot for who he is under pressure.
That was Inside the Locker Room with Tab Ramos. I'm looking forward already to next week. I think you lived up to the pressure of telling a good story, Tab. And now the pressure turns to me on following that up with Inside the Notebook, where I tell you kind of three of the latest breaking news stories that have to do with the U.S. national team and the player pool. This first one doesn't exactly totally fit that moniker, and this will be a one-off considering this is going to be a historic change, but Major League Soccer announced last week they are officially changing the season calendar. They will switch to align with the top European leagues. The league will start in July or early August, and it'll run until May with MLS Cup, which is a change from February to December. Tab, there's so many different ways to go with this. It could be about on the field, obviously. It could be about the fans and the difficulties in figuring out games in February and March and November in Minnesota, Toronto, New England, some of those northern markets. It can be a really important point in the transfer window, which should help the strength of MLS teams signing players, but also making it a little bit easier for them to move players abroad in the summer when these offers come. Maybe that's most pertinent to our discussion here with the national team, that there are guys that teams have had to reject offers for because the offers come in too late. Like this summer, the MLS summer transfer window closed on August 21st. The European windows closed on September 1st. If a bid comes in for a player on August 22nd, an MLS team cannot replace that player, making it much less likely that they would sell. So, Tab, what are your, I guess, overall thoughts on the huge schedule change as a former MLS coach?
Yeah, I think it's certainly not easy. Not easy because of the weather. And as you mentioned, some of the clubs from, up north and from Canada, that they will certainly have a tough time with this on figuring out how that's going to work. But I'm sure they have figured it out. That's why they made the change, right? I think in general, the change is very positive. I think being on schedule with the rest of the world makes the league a little bit more, let's say, legit, right? Not that it wasn't legit before, but I think it makes it more legit. Being on the same calendar makes a big difference for player transfer, as you mentioned. And I think above and beyond, it's just the competition in general will benefit from it.
I totally agree. I speak to sporting directors around the league. I think to a person, everybody was pretty much overwhelmingly positive. The only pushback from one person was, while they said this was a very good thing in terms of the transfer window, it was, well, now we're out of sync with Argentina and Brazil, which are two markets that teams acquire players from. And the Brazilian leagues have such spending power now and have been looking at MLS a little bit more. We could run into similar problems there, but I don't think, I think that pales in comparison to the positives. And same thing I feel for the fans. I really do, particularly if you're in some of those northern markets. But I also felt for the fans in Houston and Dallas and Orlando and Miami playing in July, playing in June, playing in that humidity. There will be games that are moved due to snow and winter weather, the same way that Miami and Orlando have about 5 or 6 delays every summer for their games because of the weather.
Well, I mean, I wore a suit in Houston every day.
You're a madman. You're a madman.
So that was certainly not easy. So I congratulate Ben Olsen in Houston now, because he's benefiting most from this schedule change. But having said that, overall is very positive. I have heard about some teams potentially covering their stadiums for the winter, so that could potentially be something important. Again, very positive move for MLS, and nice to see.
I agree. Let's move on to number 2, talking about summer transfers, talking about potential U.S. national team players on the move. Alex Freeman, the star of this camp. Last summer, Villarreal had a couple bids rejected. Villarreal are the overwhelming favorite to sign him, I would say. Alex Freeman has 1 year left on his contract, and there is a strong probability, if he gets to the end of his contract, he's just going to sign with Villarreal for free, unless that another team comes in with a late offer. There were a lot of teams interested in him and still are, but Villarreal are firmly in the driver's seat. What I think is more likely is that there is a deal agreed this winter between Orlando City and Villarreal. Sources tell me that is a real possibility. What I'm also told is Freeman obviously wants to secure his future. He believes that Villarreal is the right move, is the strong move, he believes in the project. He doesn't want to leave Orlando for free. Like, he loves that club. He is a product of their academy. He appreciates Oscar Pereira and the front office of bringing him along, giving him chances, and he's taken that chance. He hopes that there's a way that there could be a deal agreed, and possibly, if not probably, a loan back where he continues to play for Orlando for the next 6 or 12 months before going to Villarreal. So Alex Freeman to Villarreal, that is the team to watch for him. He will make this move at some point over the next 12 months. It just depends on when.
Well, first of all, Villarreal is a great team. They play well. They have good players. They're a foot forward team. They press high. They keep the ball. I think this would be a great fit for him on the field. Having said that, if you're Villarreal and you just watched the game against Uruguay, I'm sure you're on the phone today saying, how do we make this happen right away before this gets out of hand, right? So I agree with you. I think this deal will get done in the winter. And whether that means that he goes in the winter or not, that's to be determined. I don't think it would be a good idea for Alex Freeman to go in the middle of the season. Normally it's very difficult for a player to join a team in the middle and be successful unless you're, let's say, a center forward or a position where goals is the only thing that matters anyway. I think that the likely scenario would be that he gets signed to Villarreal this winter and stays on loan here till for the next MLS season and goes after that.
Yeah, I think that would make sense for everybody, but it's about a deal getting done, and we'll see. There are a lot of level-headed and smart people within Orlando. I'm assuming the same at Villarreal, though I can't speak to that personally. But it's certainly an exciting one and a very, very good player, getting potentially a very good move. Number 3, little dual national side of things. Brian Gutierrez, Chicago Fire attacking midfield. He got his Mexican passport. The Mexican Federation has been in contact with him. It looks more and more likely that he's going to file a one-time switch with Mexico. I would need to brush up on the rules. Maybe he would go for a camp first before making that decision, because when you make that one-time switch, you can't come back. He hasn't gotten many opportunities with the U.S. national team, which is totally fine and fair. And he's exploring keeping his options open for Mexico. And with that being said, I'm told pretty much every big club in Liga MX, particularly now that he's got his passport and will count as a domestic player, if there was to be a move, Monterrey and Club America are the two teams that I've heard that are really pushing for Brian Gutierrez, and bids are expected to come sooner rather than later. Chicago Fire rejected a bid, I believe, 12 months ago or last winter from Chivas for Brian Gutierrez. So the Liga MX interest is not new. The passport is new, and I think that changes things.
Yeah, first of all, Gutierrez is a great player. He's so fun to watch. I really like him, but I think he's likely looking at the same crowd in midfield that we're looking at with the national team and seeing where am I going to have the best opportunities. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes, with the national teams, as much as you want to keep everyone sort of under your banner, players just at the end of the day are going to do what's best for them and for their families. And I think likely in this case, I'm not going to disagree with Brian Gutierrez that going to Mexico is likely a good move. I think he's going to have more of an opportunity to play on that Mexico team that he would on this U.S. team, at least the current U.S. team. So I think good move for him. Unfortunate move for us. But I think it comes at a time where our midfield is overcrowded, and his chances would be very limited.
And on the personal side, for the club side, those Liga MX Giants, those are really, really big clubs for I don't know if some fans don't understand how big that is, like going there or maybe somebody wants to see him go to Europe. There's a lot more money in Mexico, and I got to tell you, the pressure is there. Those are really big clubs, and I hope that people understand and can respect that. So with that, Tab, it's our first episode. I think it went pretty well. I think we should do this again next week.
We made it. Maybe we should do another one, right?
Hey, I agree, and I hope that our wonderful bosses here at iHeart agree. So thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Inside American Soccer. Please rate, review, and subscribe. New shows drop every Wednesday. We'll see you next week.